called it Kill Devil, and he used it to kill 100 men. We'll talk about Sam Hildebrand's gun and other things when we return on Civil War Talk Radio.
As a child, I spent a lot of time at the big
office building,
just reading books. My mom insisted I stay in
the highway on-ramp
to finish my education. So she dropped me off at the
office building
before going to her second job. She didn't want me working at the
vacant lot
like my dad.
When we lose a historic place, we lose a part of who we are. To learn how you can help protect places in your community, visit nationaltrust.org. History is in our hands. A message brought to you by the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the Ad Council.
I'm Mary Hart, and this is AWRT Empowering America. Born in 1897 in Philadelphia, Marion's musical talent was obvious right from the beginning. In 1925, Marion entered a New York Philharmonic voice competition, and she won first prize. She debuted with the Philharmonic a few months later. In 1939, Marion was invited to perform at Constitution Hall. But since the Daughters of the American Revolution owned the hall, they denied Marion's use of it because she was black. Eleanor Roosevelt resigned her membership in protest and arranged a concert for Marion at the Lincoln Memorial. Over 75,000 people attended. In 1955, Marion became the first African American to join the Metropolitan Opera. In 1991, contralto Marian Anderson received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award.
Empowering America is brought to you by the Foundation of American Women in Radio and Television and is made possible through the generous support of AT&T, the world networking company.
World Talk Radio, bringing the world to you.
Welcome back to Civil War Talk Radio. I'm Jerry Prokopovich, talking today with Kirby Ross, editor of the autobiography of Samuel S. Hildebrand. Before we get back to our subject, I will say thank you to our engineer Anthony, who's done a fine job keeping things together here, keeping the static out this week, and coming up with some very interesting and creative new commercials for us all to listen to during the breaks. But historical pedant that I am, if you heard the commercial about Marian Anderson that we just heard, many of us know the inspiring story of her concert in Washington, D.C., and Eleanor Roosevelt's work to secure a venue for her at the Lincoln Memorial when she couldn't use Constitution Hall. The DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution, get sort of a bad rap for not letting her perform there. There was actually civic regulations. The city of Washington itself segregated many of its facilities, and the DAR didn't really have a legal option to have an African-American performer use that hall. It was segregated not just by their choice, but by other choices, as I understand the story. Now, maybe I should look that up and confirm that I'm right. But my recollection is it wasn't just the fault of this particular organization, but part of the overall culture at the time. Washington was very much a southern city in the 1930s. It doesn't excuse what happened to her, but it spreads the blame more broadly, so we can't scapegoat any one organization for past segregation. But enough of that. If we're going to look for people we want to blame in history and look back at the historical figures and say, oh, what was wrong with those people, we've got a good one today in this character, Samuel S. Hildebrand, the renowned Missouri bushwhacker, whose autobiography was originally published, I believe, in 1870, but is now out in a new edition. Kirby, am I right about that date? Is that when this book first came out?
1870, yes. It went through one printing. Hildebrand was killed shortly after it was released, and in his death, he dropped off into obscurity, and so too did the book. I've been doing a variety of research on southeast Missouri and the warfare down there during the Civil War, and I would consult with Hildebrand's book on occasion. The opinions regarding his book range from outright derision to you can believe everything it says, from depending on who the person was you were talking to. As I was doing my research, I would come up with, I wasn't researching Hildebrand specifically, but I would kept Hildebrand material kept cropping up in what I was researching. And as it would crop up, I would make a copy of it and file it away. And it finally occurred to me that I probably have enough there to add on to the book and show that it could be useful as a resource tool for historians. So,
well, you've certainly done that. The book has approximately just under 100 pages of annotations, and these are often quite thorough textual annotations that have excerpts from letters, from diaries, from official reports, from newspapers, that you connect to the events Hildebrand reports so that the reader can see if Hildebrand is telling the truth or not. And he certainly does exaggerate, to put it mildly, a lot of the time. But there's a kernel of truth to most of his stories. Is that a fair estimate?
Yes, I would agree with that. In my research, luckily, Missouri they've archived their historical materials very well in regard to the Civil War, at least what I've researched. You had the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis, the State Archives in Jefferson City, the State Historical Society in Columbia, Western Historical Manuscript Collection in Kansas City, Columbia, Rolla, and St. Louis. And the Civil War materials they have are exceptional. I would go to these archival repositories and just start going through what they had. I wouldn't know what I was really looking for. It was one of those deals where you know it when you see it. And I got lucky with a lot of this Hildebrand stuff. In other areas of my research, I was more focused and was specifically looking for Hildebrand materials, Provo Marshall records that they maintain in Jefferson City at the State Archives was a gold mine of material. I also went through court records, grand jury proceedings that occurred at grand juries that were impaneled during the 1860s to look into deaths, court investigations. There was even a court case, one or two court cases I looked to, that post-war court cases. So I tried to leave no stone unturned, and I suppose I was quite lucky in coming up with the breadth of material that I did, that I was able to add to the annotations. And you're correct, the annotations are about 100 pages. It's almost maybe a little over one-third of the entire book.
But I want to stress to the listeners that it's not just lists of titles of documents or anything like that, but often you will print several paragraphs of a contemporary newspaper story, or an excerpt from an officer's report, so the reader can judge from the actual primary source material just how much of Hildebrand's story rings true and doesn't. The annotations are as much part of the book as the text is, and I found I was reading them with my hand, with my finger at the back, and I would read the text and go to the note and say, okay, so that did happen.
That's right. I would footnote. I went through and just retyped the entire book, the Hildebrand book, and then as I was going through, I would footnote different passages that Hildebrand in his statements, and the reader can jump back and forth, and when they see the footnote and see what else there is to the story in regard to what Hildebrand himself is saying, and some of these accounts are from other individuals that I add into my footnotes there are very obscure. For example, Hildebrand would be speaking in his book about taking on a squad of Federals in a remote location, a handful of Federals in a shed, a gunfight with them. And I've actually found an account from one of those Federals in that shed telling his side of the gun battle. Another time, Hildebrand is being chased by a squad of Federals down a creek, and I found an account by one of those Federals that was chasing him down the creek. So, yes, it's the annotations definitely add a lot more to the Hildebrand story and add a lot of context to it. And I think it adds to, I don't know, it adds to what the guerrilla warfare was actually about by one that participated in it. I would say that Hildebrand is probably the most prominent Missouri guerrilla to have left behind a memoir. Of course, Quantrill was killed before the war was over, and he certainly didn't leave a memoir behind. And Bloody Bill Anderson was killed before the war was over, and he didn't leave a memoir behind. So I think we're fortunate to have Hildebrand's memoir with us today.
Now, the alert listeners out there are all clamoring, raising their hands, saying, wait, I thought you said at the beginning Hildebrand didn't go to school, couldn't read or write. How then did he produce a memoir? How did he do that?
He had a couple of neighbors that lived near him that he had previously resided to before the war. They were apparently somewhat sympathetic to him. And as he was a fugitive after the war was over, he was a fugitive. In fact, he wasn't killed until 1871. And so long about probably 1869 or so, the book was published in 1870. He sat down, and one story is that he was hiding in the basement of one of these individuals who was a physician. And during that time, they took down his story, wrote it down, and they published it. And like I say, it was published while he was still living. But he was illiterate, but he had friends that were quite literate and who helped him put his story out.
And they really did a remarkable job as a piece of, maybe literature is too strong a word, but as a piece of war writing. There's a very distinctive voice. There's a lot of colorful use of language, of similes, of sarcasm, irony, wordplay, almost humor, except it's all gallows humor about the people he's killing, so it's not funny.
Yes, I would say the writers, his biographers that helped him out were very talented, and as you read through it, you know it's Hildebrand's voice that you're hearing. So, yes, they did quite an exceptional job in that regard.
They do, and they clearly do sympathize with him. They're reporting his and this gets back to what we started with, his cold-bloodedness, his descriptions of the casualness with which he described killing his enemies, who are not necessarily enemies of the state or enemies of the Confederacy, but just his enemies. It's chilling in its repetitiveness. One can picture a postmodern movie of this being made that would be really appalling spectacle.
It would certainly make a good subject. When the war was over, Hildebrand he didn't receive a pardon so far as I could find. He did go out to Arkansas where he committed another murder, and he was arrested by the authorities down there, was tried, and was sentenced to hang. He was assisted in escaping, and after he escaped, he came back to Missouri and lived openly near his old home for a while. And there was quite a clamor in regard to him living so openly there. And that's when the authorities moved in, and he went into hiding again. During your commercial break, you had referred to his rifle, Kill Devil. You know, as we don't know what kind of rifle it was. There's some speculation that it might have been a Sharps. Due to its accuracy, I probably wouldn't disagree with that, but we just don't know what kind of rifle it was. It was in one heated shootout he was having with authorities after the war. He was trapped in a cabin. It was surrounded by a dozen posse members, and he escaped. He made escape after escape under daunting circumstances. That was one of the things about Hildebrand. When his back was up against the wall, he didn't surrender. And I think that it took his would-be captors by surprise many times. But in any event, in this time he was trapped in the cabin and he escaped, he left the rifle behind. And the rifle ended up in Rogues Gallery in the St. Louis Police Department for some years. And over the years, it's disappeared. No one knows where it's at now, but there are documented sources that state it was in the Rogues Gallery at the St. Louis Police Department.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask, and I thought it during the commercial introduction, I wanted to inquire what kind of weapon it was. He describes early on how he uses Kill Devil and puts a notch in the stock each time he kills someone with it.
Yeah, the stock would have been pretty whittled up, I would think.
You'd think there wouldn't be much left of it by the end of the war. And at first I pictured in my mind's eye a handgun, but it soon became clear this must be a long weapon.
Yes, it was a rifle, although he did... there's a picture on the cover of the book. It's supposedly Hildebrand. It's not certain whether it is or not, but it's been represented over the years as being Hildebrand, and you see he has two pistols tucked away in his belt band.
Yes, and he did carry revolvers as well.
Yeah.
He was heavily armed.
Yes. When he was ultimately captured and killed, right at the end, it was just reading the account. The police officers, and he was at a bar in Illinois, living under an assumed name, and he got drunk in the bar and was getting a little rowdy. And the police officers came and tried to arrest him, and he pulled out a knife and cut one up, and they wrestled the knife away from him and were hauling him off, and then he would pull out another knife, and he did that several times. I'm like, how many knives can a man carry on him? Apparently 3 or 4. But ultimately, he was wrestled to the ground, and I think the police officers had enough, and they put a gun to his head and pulled a trigger, and that was the end of Sam Hildebrand.
And a fitting one, given the way he executed so many of his own prisoners. Well, we're going to take another short break, and we'll come back in just a minute and talk more with Kirby Ross, editor of the autobiography of Samuel S. Hildebrand, the renowned Missouri bushwhacker. We'll be back with more Civil War Talk Radio.